Welcome to One-Weighted Machines and the B7 Audi RS4 series. Let's go over a few important things before we start the cleaning. When you're removing the intake manifold, the most important thing is to use split attention. Usually you'll use your consciousness and you'll say, okay, there's a bunch of wires here, there's the fuel lines there, there's the coolant pipes there, there's the vacuum lines here, and you'll just try to take it out and move it around a bit. What you should do here, when you go and grab it, is in your slight motions, check your vacuum actuators while you're paused. Check your fuel lines while you're paused. Do everything in small pauses and have split attention on the different important factors when it comes to removing the intake manifold. When we go over to the intake manifold, I'll show this more clearly, but there's minimal clearance when working with the intake manifold on. There is a bolt that holds this fuel clip onto the fuel lines onto the intake manifold. You want to take this off and just set it over there, and that bolt, if you use the actual intake manifold to hold that bolt in place, to remember that that's the bolt that goes with that fuel clip, and you come to take a break in this job and you put the intake manifold back, the clearances are so minimal in this job that that one bolt, even bolted back in, is going to put a lot of pressure on these lines, and it's going to have a sloppy removal and replacement process. So we'll go back to that bolt, but don't put that bolt on the actual manifold, and do remove that fuel clip because those fuel clips eventually get loose and they try to fall off. The next item I want to emphasize is taping off all of your lines. Coolant ports, vacuum hoses, PCV, fuel lines, everything. Once we start blasting the carbon, it's going to go in places that you don't anticipate based on what's going to happen. And this goes for the engine side and everything on the table. When we go over there, you'll see that everything is taped off. You don't want anything getting in these. And if you look inside of your high pressure fuel pumps, the feed lines, there's such small holes that the smallest bug or something like a clump of dirt, anything that could get in there, can cause this whole machine not to work once you put it back together. It's so sensitive, it's so complex, you really need to pay attention to these things. Take the extra couple minutes and tape everything off. It's currently -1, and this worm looking thing is on the garage floor. For those who think the taping is excessive, these things are around in the winter too, and they can get in there and clog your screens. Let's go back to split attention when you're putting the intake manifold back, because the actual intake manifold is what's going to damage something. The manifold doesn't weigh much, it weighs about 19 pounds, but when you're coming to put it in, it's a metal object that you're going to be pushing around in this space, and you need to be very attentive to everything. So things that can happen in that time is breaking this hard coolant line. Your intake manifold inlet will try to snag on this a lot of times when you're trying to move it around, so you have to be very careful of this. You also need to pay attention obviously to your vacuum actuators at the front. So it's a balance between watching this coolant line and your vacuum actuators at the front. You got to go back and forth between these until you're able to just get it in between without pushing this against the firewall and snapping it. In the same process of removing or putting back the intake manifold, this vacuum line contraption is also very sensitive. It has these brittle accordion plastic pieces to it. Really pay attention to this as well. And this fuel connector here, this fuel electrical connector, this also will tend to snag all your connectors. But I'm just saying all this stuff again and going into more detail because you don't want to damage these things when you're putting the manifold on or off if you're taking a break, which you most likely will be during this project. This next bit is for the clever people who think that they can remove the intake manifold while leaving the PCV box attached to it. Okay? That's not going to work. Sometimes you can skip steps from different instructions you get. This is not something you can do. You might look at it and say, yeah, the PCV box can probably clear these things. Let me unplug a couple lines. It's not going to work, and you're most likely going to damage something. So do follow the instructions in part 1. Push the PCV box gently back and then remove the manifold. Next we're going to discuss taping off ports while we're doing the actual cleaning. This is going to happen most times for these carbon cleanings. You're going to do it in a set of 3 and 5. So three ports valves will be open and the other 5 will be closed. Then when you go to push the car, it will be vice versa. Sometimes you'll land on 3 where the car is, and then you'll do 5, or you might be on 5 and then you'll do 3. So when you see the taping, we're either going to have 3 ports taped off or 5. But do check, use the strong flashlight. Usually these new phones have very strong flashlights. Use them, look nicely into the valves, see if they're seated, if they're closed, or if they're open, and then you'll know which ports you're going to work on. You're obviously going to work on the closed ports, and you're going to tape off the open ones. Some people opt for using microfiber towels or lint-free towels to plug the holes. I don't like that because it can leave some space for things to still fall in. So I use a tape, but it's your car, your call on what you want to do. Next, we're going to go over another topic. If you're using the method of using the air compressor and the chemicals, is the trajectory that the carbon and chemical mixture comes out of the port is not always going to be clearly determined. You have lots of electrical connectors exposed. The last thing you want is to contaminate these and have a hard to find electrical problem. So when you get started, you want to go over every electrical connector and set it facing away from the intake ports, so that if you do get some mixture that bypasses your carbon fiber towel, it's not going and getting stuck inside of your connector. So all of the ones at the front, the sides, everything, make sure they're facing away from the actual intake ports. In order to make things more clear for those of you who might be thinking of not covering your fenders, or that you have a lot of control on your microfiber towel and your air compressor skills, you will have skills after the first time that you blow some of the mixture out. But the very first port, I had filled it with seafoam the first time I did this job, and here's the car, and this is the wall. This is about 7 feet away from where the car is. The air pressure from the air compressor was so much that it shot some carbon off onto the wall of the garage. Having carbon fly as far as I showed you on the wall, it was very extreme, and that just happened the very first time that I did it. Then you get a feel for how much air to put and how to cover it very well with the microfiber towel. So it's not something you need to be concerned about that it's going to go all over the place, but I just showed that to you so that you know that on your first push with the air compressor, you may make a mistake. Now we're back over at the work table, and we're going to go over one way to store your parts while you're doing the project or taking a break. The first item we're going to discuss is the engine lifting eyelet here. So this is the one towards the firewall nearest to the steering wheel, driver's side. You want to store this one with its 2 T50 bolts, as they're different sizes and you don't want to mix them up later. So just put them in here and then store them in your storage location. The 90-degree PCV box arm, one side is taped off as it was during the process of removal. The other one is the side that goes into the PCV box. The millimeters of difference in the 90-degree arm may be important, so you may as well just leave one side taped that was exposed first when you removed the breather hoses, the vacuum breather hoses, and just leave this one exposed, and if anything were to get in there, you could easily get it out. The next item is the engine cover brackets. So when you take them out with their little 10mm bolts, these two are also slightly different sizes. Just keep them with the bracket, store them safely. If you might have kids around or somebody that could knock them over, you can also tape them. If no one's going to be in your work area though, just leave them in their place and just settle them down gently until you go to put them back. The same thing with this is the frontmost one, that was the rearmost one closest to the firewall. Leave the bolts just with them in their respective holes. and you can either tape them or just leave them that way. These small brackets are the ones that held the wiring harness in on the driver's side bank. So just keep them again with their respective bracket. The black, more rusted one is the one that goes with the bracket. I chose to use this slot just to store this one bolt. You don't have to do this. It has no relation to this. What this bolt is the bolt that I was talking about just earlier that keeps the fuel line clip in place, connecting it to the actual intake manifold. So now I'm going to show you where it goes onto the intake manifold. The reason this is here and not screwed into the intake manifold is that if you were to take a break from this project, like I told you, if you try to say, okay, I will keep this in its respective place and screw it back into its hole, when you go to put it in and out, the clearances are so tight with the intake manifold that this will snag on the high pressure fuel lines respective to the injectors every time you try to take the intake manifold in and out. The bolt that holds the fuel clip onto the fuel lines and then mounts them to the intake manifold once it's in is this here. So if you were to thread this back into here and store it here, you're going to have a lot of headache if you put the intake manifold on and off with this in place there. The next item here is a fuel clip that's the bottommost fuel clip for the injectors, and this is not something you remove during this job. Upon taking out the intake manifold though, this fuel clip was completely missing its bolt and it hadn't been put back. So this is more of a case of you can't give these cars to any kind of mechanic to work on. Either take it to a Euro Indy that you trust or that has a good reputation, or do it yourself with a lot of care. Because whoever was in there before clearly thought that this didn't need to go back or lost the bolt, and they just reinstalled everything without putting this back in. The next items are your high pressure fuel pumps. So the T30 bolts, just put them right back in, store them on their side with their bolts. Again, tape them off if you have kids around or if you think that they might fall over, or you can just carefully leave them in their holes. Same thing with the other one. And tape off the ports. Those are very small inlets. Anything gets in there, it's going to clog them. It's going to cause a lot of problems. When it comes to your evap purge valve, just tape off both ends and store it with everything else. Next, we'll go over this small Tupperware container that I have here. So a lot of the items that can't really be mixed up, I just store them in a container like this. Some people put them in bags and zip tie them off. That's safer. But again, if you're in a work environment where it's your own space and you feel safe with it, just do something like this. So I just have some of the tools that I use for this project. Instead of putting them back in the toolbox, put them in here, keep them respective to this job until you're done. This is the small piece that we use for the bolt at the back. The T50, the T50 bolts for the engine eyelets that we didn't remove from the engine. We just removed the bolts. They're the same size, so you can put them in here. All the 10 intake manifold bolts with their washers, and some assorted things that we use, say for hose clamps or 10 millimeters. The two small T20s for the coil pack brackets are in here. You can put a lot of them in here, and there's also one bolt that goes to the vacuum line on the firewall. That's this T20, and I'm going to show you guys where that is now. That's something in the first video that we didn't have access to. And also the 3 Torx bolts for the actual PCV box can go in here as well. They're all the same. So those 3 are in here, and you can't mix them up with the vacuum line one. It's the black one here. So let's go show you where this bolt came out of. So earlier in part 1, when we loosened up this vacuum line contraption, part of getting this loose enough to reduce the chances of breaking the brittle plastic is removing the black bolt, the black T30, from the actual bracket that holds this vacuum line to the engine. So if you follow my hand along this part, once you get here, when the plastic hard line turns into metal, there is a bracket attached to that which has this bolt going towards the front of the car inside of it. So that's where this bolt is from, and that's where the actual piece that we removed in part 1 is. You can't really get the camera in any closer, but if you're doing the job, you will understand what I'm talking about. On the shelf here, you'll see needle nose pliers, the screwdriver I used, some extension bit and the T30, and some of the assorted wrenches that we use to remove the fuel line connectors. You can just keep all of these in a spot together. You don't have to put them back if you're a very organized person. Just keep the tools for this job together until you're done. Make it easier for yourself. The next item is a throttle body. I'll be reusing the throttle body gasket. It's up to you if you want to buy a new one or not. The bolts, just same thing, put them in their respective holes, because if you'll remember in part 1, there's one that is not like the other ones. It's shorter and it has a different nut on the top. So you want to just keep them together. Same thing, tape them if you got kids around or if they'll fall over, or if it's your workspace, you don't need to, just keep it in the holes. Now we'll discuss this part of the fuel rail system. Again, tape off all of these ports. They have very small holes and filters. Anything gets in them, you're going to have a problem, you're going to have to chase. Keep the bolts in their respective holes. You can tape them off or just leave them if you set it down like this. Leave this fuel clip on. The T30s that hold in some more of the clips when we go to put them back, just screw them back into their holes. They get pretty tight and they just stay there. And the banjo bolts, you can't really get them off. They're part of the system there. For the PCV breather hose that goes on top, which is the first item that we removed on top of the engine, tape off all the ports again so nothing gets inside, and keep the small 10mm nut taped onto here. This is easier when you go to put it back. If you put it on the throttle body, it could get loose or fall off or something, but you can either store this on the throttle body stud or you can tape it here. Prior to removing the intake manifold, this is where I had instructed you to cut the rubber line, which is for the coolant bypass. Cut it right in half so that you don't have to buy new pieces. This piece in the middle that's going to be remaining will be stuck onto the intake manifold when you take it off the first time. It'll be about a 2-inch piece. Slide this off of the intake manifold, take it into your hardware store so that you can get the matching double-ended barbs. You're going to need 2 of them. 1, 2. You can use this clip that went on top of the intake manifold to put it on the barb. You're going to need to buy about 2 or 3 hose clamps, and you'll need the other fitting in the middle. You can take these and just fit them. I don't remember exactly what size there were. Some of the aftermarket companies also sell kits. If you're in the US, the shipping might be worth it to get it, but hardware stores sell these kind of metal barbs. So just take them in and use this piece for fitment when you go to the hardware store. I'll be repeating myself, but just to save you headache, this one at the bottom is a one-time use clamp, and in order to avoid having to go and buy more flexible hose, really look in when you have the intake manifold on and you're taking it off, and look at how long this hose is. Okay, you want to go about 2.5 inches up from here when you make your cut, because the barbs on your double-ended barbs are going to be not quite long, but they're going to be long enough that they might even come quite close to the connection onto this hard coolant pipe down here. So you're working with minimal clearances again. Look twice, 3 times before you make your cut so that you make it in the right spot. Here's a more zoomed in look as to what it's going to look like when you're finished. When you come to reinstall the manifold, this pipe here butts into this Y joint on the coolant. At first it might be rough, it might be tough, it might stick in your way and you'll say maybe the intake manifold isn't going to fit. But when I say split attention, now you have this new hose that needs to fit in minimal clearance here. When you come to put the intake manifold back, you're going to have to use your strength to hold it with one hand at some points, and you're going to have to gently move this around until you get it to a point where it's not pinched, but it has enough clearance to actually get out along with the evap purge line, the lines that are connected to the intake manifold, so that everything can go in smooth. It will be fine. You just need to be gentle with it and have some strength and split attention when you are putting this in for the first time, so that you can get it in an orientation where it will work. Okay, we've got the front of the car covered in the 3 bed sheets now. We'll just go over basically how to put it on. If you're using some kind of cloth that's not a bed sheet, you might not have some of these issues, but I'll just go over exactly what happened here so that you can troubleshoot if you're putting stuff on there. So the one goes in the front, you cover the bumper, headlights, everything, and then use just 2 small interlock bricks or something heavier. Gently set it on the air flex pipe. You're not going to break anything. Same thing on the other side. Then you're going to take the other blankets or bed sheets and you're going to tuck them into the corner of the hood. I'll show you over there. And then you're going to lift the rock up and put those under here too. So this rock is going to hold in both the middle bed sheet and the side bed sheets. Same thing repeated on the other side. The stringy, flexy part of the bed sheet that I used for the front kept trying to jump over the motor. So I just use this chain to kind of hold it in place and it weights it down. It's not clipped onto anything. It's just there. Again, with the ones you use, you might not have this issue, but you just want to make sure it's anchored down and tuck everything underneath the car so that you don't step on it and trip when you're going around the car. So you begin the edges by tucking the bed sheet into the corner of the hood. Again, make sure your paintwork is clean and your bed sheets are clean. Then once you've done this, you lift up the rock, put it on there, tuck everything under the car, and you're ready to start work. Once we push the car, you're going to be lifting all of these up again. Next, we're going to fill our brake cleaner bottle, whether it's from spray bottles or if you bought a jug. This is also the point at which you're going to put your mask and your safety glasses on. Now that you have your brake cleaner bottle ready, take your phone and use a flashlight. Modern phones have very good flashlights. Get in there, look inside each of the ports, make sure to see which valves are closed. You're going to get tuck tape and you're going to tape off the ones that are open. You're most likely going to have either 5 open or 3 open, and whichever is left is the ones that are going to be closed. So wherever your car happened to sit when you started the job, you'll either have 5 sets of valves you're going to work on or 3. Maybe you'll be 4 and 4. Anyone that I've seen do it has always been on 5 or 3. Now that we've got the open valves taped off, we're ready to start with our brake cleaner, wire brushes and picks, and loosening up the carbon. After that, we're going to use the air compressor to blow them into the rag. If you want more information on this part, please watch part 2. This stuff is all covered in great detail there. Something I remembered as I started doing the job is have something like a piece of cardboard or a yard waste bag beside the car, and this is where you're going to store your wire brushes and your picks as you alternate between them. If you put them into a microfiber towel, your steel wire brushes are just going to catch into it and it's going to be very annoying to keep getting them out of it. And you also don't want to store them on the bed sheets on the car, obviously because the brake cleaner and the chemical can go through and damage the paint or the plastics on the car or get on your electrical connectors. Keep your bottle of brake clean nice and up against the windshield there. If you put it over the coolant reservoir like I was at the beginning of this video, it's not a good idea because you could possibly have leaks that can get into your electrical connectors, and that's not something you want. There's a good chance that you're going to get brake cleaner or whatever chemical you're using into the valley there. Just use the air compressor afterwards to clean them out when the open valves are closed so that you'll be fine. But if it's going to drip a little bit, it's not a big deal. As you can see, my brake cleaner bottle is dripping a lot. These are small things that you should pay attention when you're doing the job. I'm now going to move it onto the floor, but small things that are particular to your setup, pay attention when you're doing the work. You don't want something like that to keep dripping the whole time. I can't stress enough how important it is to have your safety glasses on snug. I have to work at odd angles so that you guys can see the actual process. And I got some brake cleaner go past my safety glasses into my eye. I had to go wash it out. You're obviously going to be in a much better position. You don't have a camera that you have to try to accommodate in the process. But be careful. Look down so that it can't go in from the bottoms of your safety glasses. If you really want to, get safety goggles. But if I wasn't filming, safety glasses are more than sufficient for this job. You just need to be leaning over, and if there is going to be overspray, it needs to go up and hit the glasses. I'm going to spend a lot more time on this port, as the same with the others. I'll show each one being done and the different wire brushes and picks being used. But now that I'm doing the job again, the steel wire brushes are what you're going to use the most. You're going to be working blind mostly. Once the chemical's in there, it's a big puddle, you can't even see what's going on. You just got to get in there and feel every angle around the valves until you can break it loose and get it into 1 or 2 microfiber towels, and then you get a better look at it on your next round of putting brake clean in. So where the picks really come in is after you've done some rounds with the steel wire brushes. Then you take your straight pick and your weird angled pick and you get in there and you start getting at the more difficult spots. Some of them help getting around the actual cylindrical part of the valve, and the straight pick helps you get at the actual very edges of the valve where the carbon builds up. So the picks come in after the steel wire brushes. The carbon buildup isn't too severe on this car. Last time I remember using a lot more cleaner. The brake clean is doing a great job. After just 2 passes with the steel wire brush, I've almost got about 85% of it off, which is much faster than last time. So brake cleaner is going to be just fine. Even if you have a lot of buildup, it's not going to take much longer than this for you to get it. The only thing I recommend is don't fill the port up the whole way with whatever chemical you're using. Just about 1/4 to 1/3 is more than you need. Once the steel wire brush is in there, it moves around the fluid a bit too. So those are just some more tips there. Now that I've done a number of passes on that port, again, there is no number for this. This car had minor carbon buildup. If your car is a first time or has major buildup, it could take a number that I can't give you. So once it gets to a point though, you'll see that you'll put the brake clean in and you'll go in with the steel wire brushes and it won't get much better. That final small amount of residue that's patchy all over the place, that's where the picks are going to come in. And you don't want to put too much brake clean in this time, or whatever chemical you're using. It's going to be coated. It's going to be slightly moist. Just get in there with the straight pick and the weird angled pick and start scraping away at it. This is going to take a really long time if you want a perfect finish. So it's time for the pick, and then you move on to the next port. This should go without saying for most people doing this job. You won't have much buildup all the way up to where the valve guides are, but be very gentle there. You don't want to start poking that stuff with a pick. In the stage when you're using the picks, it's okay to take one of your gloves off, use your pick, and hold your phone or a flashlight in the other hand in order to have a more efficient cleaning of the actual valves. There's a lot of blind angles in there, and having a light there will make it a lot quicker for you to break up the carbon that's remaining. Once you've broken it up a decent amount, spray some brake cleaner back in there, get back in there with the steel wire brush, blow it out with the compressor, and you should be fine. Okay guys, so now I remembered that this odd angled pick, the straight pick, the larger 10-inch straight pick, is the best tool for your after steel wire brush to get in there. You're going to do a couple rounds, 3-4 rounds with this. This pick, the small one or the big one, the best thing that it is when you shine your flashlight in there and it looks like it's all cleaned, on the inside here there's a blind angle, okay, and your straight pick cannot get in there. So the angle on this pick is the only thing that will allow you to scrape the edge on the inside here. So it goes in vertical, but that angle allows you to scrape that edge. So that's why you definitely want to have this pick, and don't look in there and think it's clean. There's a blind angle that's not clean. In regards to the short 6-inch straight pick, the place that you're going to need this one the most, while you're shining your flashlight or holding your phone with your left hand, with your right hand on the back part of the port, getting around the back of the valve and getting around the edge there, that's where the short straight pick is going to come in. The shaft on and the handle on the 10-inch pick, which work very well for most of it, is not going to have the angle of this one. This one will allow you more maneuverability to get into the back side there. Okay guys, so after the one port here that I just spent some time on, we're going to move on to one of the dirtiest ones so you can kind of see the difference. It's all done with the brake cleaner. Regardless of how saturated your microfiber towel is, every time you move to a new port, grab a new towel, just because that first compressor blow of chemical mixture is going to be the most dense, and you want your towel to have the most absorption so that you don't get stuff going all over the place. So do that. From the course that the carbon clean is taking this time, I don't think I'll be using more than 15 towels for this whole job. I recommended 40 in the previous section. I did use 30 to 40 the first time when the carbon buildup was really bad. So depending on how long it's been since the previous carbon clean, if you got it at a shop the first time and you're doing it now yourself, you might not need to buy so many microfiber towels, but just buy 30 to 40 if you don't know, because you might be at it for a long time if you have a lot of carbon buildup. These two connectors, the vacuum actuator and the other sensor, I can't remember what it was for right now, but these two are going to have a tendency to jump out when you're working here, and they're going to be pointing right in the path of carbon chemical blowing out. So inside the fan shroud here, you're going to have a little wires and stuff here. You want to gently get these and put them back there, because they are very prone to getting actual carbon on them, and then that can ruin your electrical connectors. Another tip I'm going to give you if you're working by yourself is to remove your safety glosses when you're not using the compressor to blow stuff out. They're going to get fogged up, they're going to get carbon and chemical on them, and they're usually not very clear plastic safety glosses. So put them on, take your glove off, put them on, use the compressor, then take your glove off, take the safety glosses off, and get your visual perception in there so that you can actually see what you're doing, because there's a lot of blind angles, and if you work with the safety glasses the whole time when you're trying to break stuff up, it's going to drive you mad. And here we have one of the worst ports now cleaned up. Again, all with brake cleaner. Now we're going to tackle the other 3 open ports on this set on the other side. So the rate of chemical use is not that much with the carbon buildup this time. I don't think I'll use more than 5 to 7 cans of brake cleaner by the time I'm done. The important thing to note is that on about 12 of the valves where the carbon buildup is not very severe, there is a lot of carbon around the edge of the valve, which probably contributes to the valve overlap theory. And also in a high performance engine with high tolerances like this, when that valve comes to close, that split second of opening and closing time with the carbon built up mostly around the ring edge of the valve can have more effect than one would think. I still recommend, if you don't know when the last carbon clean was done, get at least 15 cans of brake cleaner if you're going the can route, because I did use a lot more the first time around. These metal edges on bank 2 are going to give you some nice cuts on your fingers if you work without gloves. want to make note for you guys that even though it's taking me a lot less time to get the bulk out and I'm using less chemical and less towels, once it gets to the point of the final bits of carbon around the edges and on the valve, it's still taking just as long. I'm still using about 30 minutes per port on this round of the job as well. You can try soaking. From the last experience I had where I soaked, it really didn't make much of a difference. Just spray the chemical in, wait a couple seconds and start scrubbing. Carbon's really gummy, even with strong solvents. The soaking doesn't do much. It's once the steel wire brush gets in there and makes contact with the chemical that most of the work gets done. Every used old car has its own mystery as to who's been in here before and what's been done and what's not. How did this happen? One thing I want to urge people who are taking this on as a wrenching project where it's beyond their comfort level. If you're using your steel wire brushes, you keep them in the port. Don't start getting them on the edges. Okay, you don't want to get them on the edges. This can cause permanent damage to components that can trash the whole engine. If you have vacuum leaks, and then, I mean, you can fix stuff with sealants and gaskets and stuff like that, but on a car like this, you don't want it to ever get to that. So if you're using the steel wire brush or picks or anything, keep it inside the port. Don't angle it. Don't try to clean anything off of the surface with this. And the same thing on the intake manifold side. Keep it inside the port. Don't damage these metal surfaces. No metal on metal contact at all. One more tip. This is what I did the first time and what I did on the first two ports that we did here on this car this time. Focus on one port and finish it. Use a steel wire brush, go to the pick. Steel wire brush, pick. Chemical blow, pick, wire brush. Keep going until you finish one port and then move on to the next one. The amount of focus that's required to get to that final clean with the between the picks and the steel wire brush gets very annoying if you try to do 2 or 3 ports at the same time. Say soaking them, steel wire brushing, and then jumping between 3 to finish 3 all together. One port is much easier on you when you're working and you're going to do a better job. I tried doing on the second bank these 3 that are in a line all at the same time, and it's just much more annoying. It's not as pleasant to work this way. This is difficult work to film while doing the actual cleaning. I want it to be clear to you guys that the picks, I'm doing a lot more rounds of cleaning with the picks than there are clips in the film. And storing your picks up here is fine. Just sometimes when you're going around with the picks, especially if you have heavy buildup, you're going to want to pick up a microfiber towel and clean off the end of the pick and then go back as you're working with it. When you're going at it with the pick, have your phone in one hand with no glove and the pick in the other hand with a glove. That allows you to maneuver your flashlight a lot better and not scrape your hand while using the pick. In previous parts of the series, I've mentioned that this small steel wire brush helps a lot at the beginning. This will, when you have heavy carbon buildup, it will clump up and you'll throw it away. Didn't really do that this time. There wasn't as much buildup. The 0.5 to 0.7 of an inch diameter is still one of the best use ones. It gets in there, it makes good friction, it gets rid of a lot of carbon. I hadn't given too much credit to is that midway after using picks and the 0.5 to 0.7 inch, this one helps a lot in getting a good amount of it out. This one is in the range of about half an inch. Okay, so if that's probably more on the 0.6 to 0.7 side. This is just under half an inch. Let's measure that one again, just so when you're buying stuff you can be more sure. Okay, this one is actually closer to 3/4 of an inch. The small one will help a lot at the beginning. For the later stages of cleaning though, regardless of whether you have heavy or light buildup, you're going to use both this one and this one a lot. Both of them are going to help. This is used the most. This helps in the middle stages. So we've begun the process of cleaning. In the next part of this series, we're going to show the steps required in order to close the second set of valves. We'll show the continued cleaning progress, and we'll also do reinstallation with torque specs.